Hey guys, it's time for another Austen and August video, and today I will be talking about Mistaking Her Character by Maria Grace. The full synopsis of the book, as well as links to where to get it, and a chance to win this, are below, so you can check all of those out in the info. But before we get started, I just want to give you a heads up. There will definitely be spoilers, so if you are afraid of that, don't want to have it spoiled for you, you might not want to watch this one quite yet. Yeah, it is not a traditional review. More of a discussion of mistaking her character, and let's get to it. So the premise of the book is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice where instead of meeting in Meryton and at Longbourn where Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice is from, instead, the Bennets are not in quite the same circumstances. They're not landed gentry the way they were in the original. Instead, Mr. Bennet is a physician, and he is the personal attending physician to Lady Catherine de Bourgh's sickly daughter Anne. So, totally different circumstances, and that's how Lizzie ends up meeting Darcy, who, of course, goes to visit his aunt, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Now, starting with this premise changes things dramatically. When you're going into a retelling, there are kind of two ways to approach it, both as an author and as a reader. So as an author, you can either retell it from another perspective or continuing on, setting it in a different time, different place, different genre, whatever, but still keeping the spirit of everything the same and the plot points the same. Or you can completely shake things up and just take the bare kernels of the story to make something totally new. So those are the two ways that you can approach it as an author. As a reader, obviously, you can either like one or the other. Now, a lot of retellings, especially for Jane Austen, take that first approach where they're just kind of making some tweaks or continuing on, you know, writing sequels, writing modern adaptations, things like that, and not too many very big shakeups, especially in the key plot points. Everything still kind of follows the same format. This book takes the second path, where it's a really, really big shakeup. Now, when you're writing something like that, the kind of easy path, and I think the more palatable path for a lot of readers, is to have that big shakeup but still keep things essentially the same, have the characters act the same, have a lot of the same plot points still pop up, and the fun is in how you get there and how you make those things still work in this new alternate universe, basically. But the more interesting one is when you decide that because of this big shakeup, things are totally different. And it sort of becomes a nature versus nurture study where, okay, if Mr. Bennet isn't a landed gentleman but has to work for his living, the very indolent and sort of aloof and abrupt Mr. Bennet, how would he respond in this situation? And if Lizzie is raised as the daughter of a physician rather than a landed gentleman, how does she act? And if they meet at Lady Catherine's instead of in Meryton where Wickham is, how do they interact? So you have all of these new possibilities that open up and these questions that you have to ask yourself. And it becomes a balancing act of keeping the retelling aspects present so that it still feels like the original work in some way, but also following the logical conclusions of the world that you set up. Now, this is where you can lose a lot of readers, and I think for this retelling, when you take Mr. Bennet, who has always been sort of playful but slightly problematic element of Pride and Prejudice, I think most people love him and love the relationship he has with Lizzie, but recognize that he's very flawed. If you put him in a whole new element, with new pressures on him and he's got to exert himself a lot more, how does that change him? And in this case, it changes him quite dramatically, and he is a pretty vicious man. He really treats Lizzie rather horribly, and that, of course, in turn changes how Lizzie acts and the type of person that she is. And so then you have to look at, well, is this not only honoring the character that was written by Jane Austen, but is it honoring who they actually would become in these circumstances? Is there still some core that is them, that is their nature, but that has been changed and that they've had to adapt due to their nurture? And I think if you're looking for the familiarity of Pride and Prejudice in a retelling, and you're still looking to have saucy Elizabeth and her lovingly sarcastic relationship with her father, and then you don't find that, it might make you kind of angry, and it might make you really disappointed in the retelling because it's not what you recognize. It's not the characters you know and the story that you know. And that's fine if that's not what you want out of a retelling. But what really fascinates me is seeing when an author is able to pull off believable changes, even if they're totally different from the original. So for me, having Lizzie, who we've always thought of as very independent and very sparkling and witty and fascinating and kind of turns heads in the room based on the force of her personality alone, to transplant her to a place where her father is not his happiest normal self and is taking his anger out on her because she's the one that can handle it, and where she's basically being raised also under the guidance of Lady Catherine, who they have to pay much more attention to, and she has to tiptoe around because otherwise her father would lose this very secure job that is keeping them, you know, solvent, is helping them live their life respectfully. It totally changes what you would expect of Elizabeth, but there's still got to be that core there of someone who's very intelligent and steady and capable, and that is still there, but in a much quieter and much more timid way. And I think that might be hard for some readers to swallow, but I personally found it really fascinating because I thought it both fit Maria Grace's world that she set up and was a sort of logical conclusion of who Austen's characters were transplanted into this new scenario. This sort of continues to every aspect of the book, so that you're always kind of straddling this line of, am I happy with these changes? Am I happy with this angry Mr. Bennet? No, I'm not. But does it make total sense for the world that has been set up? Yes, it does. So it's this really fascinating reading experience, and one of the more sort of complex retellings I think that I've read. Instead of it being just a right by the numbers, these are the plot points and let's go to it, it really is this merging of Austen's idea and Maria Grace's idea. Seeing more of Lady Catherine, of course, is interesting. Seeing how Darcy deals with Lady Catherine in this new scenario and how he finds Elizabeth, feels about Elizabeth. Do I think it any more likely that he would have been willing to fall in love with the daughter of a physician than a landed gentleman? No. And so that is a pretty big willing suspension of disbelief that you have to do there, considering how much he struggled the first time around. But when you reconcile that with the fact that she's in his face all the time, she's at his aunt's house all the time, and he's seeing her kind of in her element, it does make sense that he eventually couldn't resist that. And he's in his own element too, so he's more comfortable. He's not that haughty Darcy that we know from Netherfield. Instead, he's the more sort of comfortable, casual one that we see at Rosings that is maybe better able to sit back and appreciate what Elizabeth has to offer. So the whole thing is just a really interesting kind of play on extremes and on the idea of an alternate universe retelling. And I think it's one of the ones that takes that the farthest and the most logically sound, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to kind of discuss that and discuss that sort of nature versus nurture thing that comes into play as a writer and as someone who has to plot out something and make it believable, not only for the world that you were given, but the world that you're setting up on top of that. And I want to know what you guys think in the comments. So is that something that you look for in a retelling? Do you like to have things completely upended and things maybe not recognizable in the way that you want them or expect them to be? Or do you prefer to have that familiar? I mean, I think that's why a lot of people go to retellings. They want more of it. So they tend to gravitate toward things that are a little more predictable and a little more imitative because it gives them those same feelings that they're missing and the reason they're wanting more to begin with. So I don't know, it's all just really interesting to me. And so let me know in the comments what kind of retelling person you are, if any. Do you look for something that you know, or do you look for something totally different? But that's all I have to say on Mistaking Her Character by Maria Grace. Bit of a review, bit of a discussion on the very art of doing a retelling. Sorry if I rambled a bit, but I had a lot to say and a lot of things that I found fascinating with this. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as I said, you can enter to win, so make sure to check that out. And I'll be back soon with more Austen and August videos. Until then, thanks you guys again. Seriously, thank you guys for watching, and happy reading!